Hello, beautiful people. Welcome back to Two Perfect Podcasts. My name is Yzel.
My name is Renz.
And we're not
Perfect! Two Perfect Podcasts dedicated to three things.
First, we are dedicated to sharing super personal stories and owning our imperfection.
Second, we want to create a safe space where we can be our most authentic selves.
And third, we want to build a community for people like us who are fed up with the pressure of trying to be perfect. How do you say perfect in Tagalog?
Perfecto.
Wow, same in Spanish. Is it? I wouldn't be surprised. Well, before we get started on this episode, make sure you like, subscribe, follow, find us on all social media, YouTube, Two Perfect Podcasts. We are also on Instagram and YouTube, but not really, but yes, we are. And if you like the content of today's episode, make sure you share it with your friends and family. Let's talk about it. Email us twoperfectpodcast@gmail.com because today's episode is super special. I almost said perfect.
Super!
What is the Tagalog word for special?
Special.
Ang galing naman yung episode.
We obviously don't know, so if you guys know the answer to those two questions, please.
So today's episode is really special because we're actually talking about our cultural background. And obviously we need to refresh some of our Tagalog words, maybe take a Tagalog class because we're struggling.
Mm-hmm.
Fact. 2 words already. Sheesh.
I never know because my mom would just say, perfect.
Perfect. Don't put this on your mom. Don't put this on your mom.
It's not on her. It's everyone because I don't know. It's on me.
Hindi ko alam. That's all I know Tagalog.
Works.
Hindi ko alam. Opo. No, but seriously, you guys, we are talking about our cultural background. It's October, so this is the official Filipino American History Month.
Yes.
This month, October, is officially Filipino American History Month. Not heritage because it's about learning history more than just celebrating heritage.
Culture,
yes. Although I think they kind of they go hand in hand. I think it's a great way to celebrate who you are and your background. But yeah, why do you want to do this episode?
I think it's important to inform people, especially me, where we came from, to be...
It's important to inform me,
because obviously I don't want to know
I'm the most ignorant motherfucker.
I obviously have no idea where I came from. Sorry. But no
apology.
Seriously.
Authentically ourselves.
No, for real.
No, for real. I need help. Who am I? Who are we?
I struggle often with my identity. So what helps is learning your background. And I think that's why it's important that we have discussions over it and we learn more about ourselves.
If you're watching the visual, please excuse me if I end up with a chocolate stash because I'm drinking hot cocoa. And so it might happen, just to warn you.
It's the thumbnail.
They're gonna be like, yo, does she have shit on her lip? Like, what's happening in this episode? No, but really though, I'm so ignorant. It's really sad. It's really fucking sad. But I did brush up quite a bit to prepare for this episode.
That's good.
I'm excited to share the little bit of information that I do know. And hopefully we can get feedback and people can start correct me if I'm wrong.
That's
always a big fear. Like, oh my gosh, I'm going to say the wrong thing. But you know what? This podcast is about owning your sense of self. If you make a mistake, oh well, just correct it, move on. Yeah. It's all good.
It's part of the process.
It's part of the process. It's part about being your most authentic human self, and humans make mistakes. So plural. Yep.
Because there's going to be a lot, baby.
Yes. So what do you want to share? What did you do? What
did I find out?
What did you find out about yourself and your culture? Our culture.
So in the digging that I did see that we were actually the first documented Asians in the US history.
Yeah.
So I was actually surprised by that. I was like, wow, because just learning history from public school and stuff like that, I always just heard of Asians, as in Chinese, coming over here to build the railroad and stuff like that. So I just assumed maybe they were the first couple ones, but it turns out we were the first documented Asians here since the 1500s. And I was like, oh, wow, Filipinos in the 1500s here in America, what does that look like? That's so amazing.
I read that too, and I was feeling very prideful.
Yes.
So that is, there's so much to that, because at that point in time, we were still under Spanish rule.
Yeah.
So that's a big reason why we have Filipinos moving to the America before United States was its own country.
Yeah.
So
that's how they had access.
Yeah, before the Revolutionary War, Filipinos were already here and starting their lives. And the interesting part, okay, go for it. No, go, because I'm going to start rambling. What were you saying about that?
I had a brain fart. But yeah, I thought that was super interesting. And then they also did touch upon what you were talking to me about, just the human zoos. I think you were talking to me about that with the Native Americans and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And we were actually also included in that monstrosity.
So it is honestly mind-blowing reading about Filipino American history, because there's so many layers to it.
Yes.
And obviously, it's just inevitable when you read about history. There's so much classism.
Of course.
Where you really have various levels of opportunities depending on what class you come from. Mm-hmm. And, you can see that it's very easy to tell reading about just the different experiences that Filipinos moving to this country and what that was really like based on, where they are in terms of social standing.
Yeah.
Or the class standing, or socioeconomic standing, I should say. Because with the human zoos, the one you're talking about, so that started to happen around the late 1800 or early 1800s, I believe. Mm-hmm. Actually have it in my notes. So that happened, late 1800s, early 1900s. And that happened with, of course, Filipinos that were more native.
Yeah.
So, because in the Philippines, you already have several different class systems.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I should say several. You can correct me if I'm wrong. You have just, people who were natives or lived in the mountains or were more tribal, which was basically what it was like prior to Spain coming to the Philippines. Maybe we should do a little bit of background so people have an understanding of
the Philippines.
Yeah. Because maybe people are not knowledgeable. So This is a history podcast for today.
For maybe
the whole month. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
a little bit.
yeah, a little bit.
Okay. I know in my research, I found that the Philippines is composed of a lot of different influence, a lot of them from like Malaysia, even some from Australia, even some from India, because that's
Mhm.
kind of like where the originators kind of came
Mhm.
from. And then from that point on, it kind of became just separate tribes. I
Mhm.
believe that they just kind of all did their own thing. I'm
Mhm.
not that super informed
Mhm.
with a lot of like pre-colonial Philippines, like so if you guys know a lot, please let me know. But around like the like 1500s, right? That's
Mhm.
when the Spanish came.
Yes. So my dad always told me
Yeah.
that we are a lot of our earlier like influences were Malay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Malaysia?
Malay. Am I saying that right?
Malay?
Malay?
I know.
Malay?
I think that's wrong. Malay.
If you're here for facts, you're in the wrong place. You're here. Oh, we're only here for the truth.
No facts.
It's all truth, no facts in here. Yep.
Yeah.
So my dad always said that originally there were people called Negritos.
Yeah.
Negritos that were native to the islands, and the Philippines is comprised of thousands of islands, and they basically integrated with Austronesian peoples who, basically mixed and mingled, and then you have the Malay coming over,
Yeah.
and then you have kind of like a hodgepodge of
Yeah.
like various tribal communities coming together, and that's happening for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, which is why the Philippines is rich with different languages.
Diversity. Yeah.
And it's such a diverse country because you have thousands of islands that at one point in time were not really connected.
Yeah.
And so they have their own
Specific
language,
regions,
they have their
yes.
own kind of way of living life, although very similar, and they are all a mix of different like tribal communities. And then in the 1500s you have Magellan, like Spain coming in and trying to establish
quote
it,
unquote unite.
establish it as a community, and then they did.
Yeah.
Which, to go back to your point, Filipinos coming to America in the 1500s was really because what happened was you have a lot of Filipinos that opposed Spanish rule, and they were not happy that Spain was there and basically claiming their stake in their land. And what they did with individuals who are very outspoken and active, other than like, killing them, they would send them away. So they would ship them out to Guam or the Mariana Islands, and some Filipinos would basically find a way to escape their banishment, essentially, and their servitude for Spain, to and basically escaping to the United States. And that's why they came out to Louisiana.
Yeah, that's what I read too.
Yeah.
That's how we got here so early.
We're like, fuck that. I ain't trying to be no servant. I ain't trying to be exiled. I'm going to make my own way.
Yeah.
Is basically, no, it wasn't Louisiana. I'm sorry. It was in Morro Bay. It was in California.
Yeah.
So, which makes sense because it's going that way, and then they're going that way, and it hits California. So, yep, that's what it was. And that's it. That's all we know.
Yeah. That's so empowering, just paving path. And it just speaks volumes to still what we do now.
Yeah.
We escape, or we try to enrich our own lives by going to different places, which is just kind of what we do now as a country.
I feel like it's just all different types of levels of that, but I think when you realize, like, in your ancestry, you just really have tons of tribal communities that's what they did, is they basically left their islands and on a ship, just sailed away,
Yeah.
and that's how they ended up in the Philippines. So
Yeah.
in terms of our ancestors and how they established the Philippines just in general, like that's what it was.
Yeah.
Is they sailed into this beautiful island and created life. And basically we're still doing that.
We're still here.
We're still here. But yeah, anything else?
To me, it's just crazy that we can date that far back to our, that there's proof that we've been here for that long, but our recognition is still on its, it's still a work in progress.
Yeah, that is something I read. This Filipino American scholar, they called it, they termed it the invisible minority. I don't know if you've heard about that.
Sounds familiar.
Invisible minorities. So they coined this term specifically for Filipino Americans because what's happened in the Filipinos that have moved here, especially under the different circumstances that Filipinos have moved here, what they've typically done is assimilate.
Yes.
We are seen as the community that assimilates the most.
The easiest. Yes.
The easiest
yes.
and the most.
Yes.
And I think that has a lot to do with our existence and our genealogy and just like our ancestry being such different cultures.
Yes.
You have Spanish blood, you have native blood, you have, just all different types of DNA creating who you are.
And even like our education system in the Philippines is built by Americans.
Yeah.
That's why it's so easy. Because we're actually the Asians who knows English, or like we have the easiest transitions to here in America because we speak English.
Yes, because our education was built by America, but also because we were a Commonwealth of America. We were a territory by United States. Basically owned the Philippines for
like 4 years, I think.
What?
For 4 years?
40
years.
Ooh. 40 years, yeah. So for 40 years, or a little bit more than that, America was overseeing the Philippines. So our education system was built by them. And so not only did we know Spanish, our native tongues, and English, we also knew English. So it just allows us to be more of a chameleon, I would say, because of what our people have gone through, and also our political ideologies and just social ideologies as well. Yeah,
that's so interesting,
right? So I actually wrote that in my notes too. So Philippine sailors were the first Asians to arrive in America. Sailors escaping Spanish servitude. And then even after that, you have just, we call them Manila men.
Yeah.
You have Manila men arriving to Louisiana in like the 1700s, and they are typically like cowboys and ranch hands and stuff like that. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So my favorite thing was about love.
Yes.
Was that yours too? Okay, go.
No, go for it.
No,
you already started it.
Go.
I just know there was like some research that I've done for college a while back where, I believe like a white person fell in love with like a Filipino, and I know there's like a court case because like she wanted to marry him, and she was like appealing like, I want to marry this man, so she went to court and fought to marry him. But that's all I kind of remember.
So there are a plethora of different situations in which Filipinos marry women of different cultures, white. I read like a case of like a Japanese, American-born Japanese woman as well. Because when Manila men came to Louisiana, you also have like again, you have to take into consideration the class system that someone is coming from. So you have some Filipinos coming from like of a higher class and moving to America.
Yeah.
And it wasn't seen as a bad thing. So there's like actually a situation which I thought was really cool because there was this professor that traced back this lineage of this. I believe he worked with the U.S. Navy and he worked with relations like international trade relations, and this was around the 1800s, and he met I believe an Irish woman, and then they fell in love and they had kids, and they were able to trace back like in like 100-something years, like all of their children's and their ancestries and stuff like that, and like where their kids end up. And so you just have this mix of like Filipino American like lineage, I guess, dating all the way back to the 1800s, which was really interesting. So in that point in time, it wasn't seen as a big issue because Filipinos were considered white.
Yeah.
So in that era, because you have you could have Filipinos of like a higher class who were seen as like Spanish, because we were Spanish
at that time.
At that point in time, we were looked at as being of white descent. And then you have the mestizo term, which is basically like a Spanish Filipino.
Yeah, I think so.
That's the way I always looked at it. It was like a mestizo is like a fair-skinned like Filipino person because they have Spanish descent in them.
I know there's like degrees because I actually saw like the chart they made up of like what's considered a mestizo, and like they have like the other terms for it depending on the degree of blood you have. So it's like a 50%, 50%.
Yeah.
I think that's mestizo, and that's why they're usually fair and so forth depending on your percentage, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So at some point in time, we were looked at as white.
Yep.
And that's what it was. And throughout history, you just see kind of like a debate trying to classify what race Filipinos belong to.
Yeah.
Which I think really touches on how we had a hard time kind of embracing that Asian American label.
Yeah. And I do remember that because I think at a certain point they started to feel like there was like a lot of Manila men because like they had like that access, and that's when they started to limit. And I think that's also around the same time where they annexed us. It's just like we just stopped having access to go here in America, and they had like 100-person limit. Yeah, they like limited it because like at a certain point they were like, we need to slow that down. Yeah.
Like a immigration ban.
Yes.
Basically.
Yes. Basically. Basically.
I know that with the banning of immigration, a lot of it is influenced by Filipino men marrying white women. It's always a tough reality in terms of like reading in history for white men to accept that white women fall in love with men of color.
Yep.
And white guys don't like that. However, there's never any issue with a white man exploiting women of color.
Yep.
There is never a ban on a white man, but the ban is very, in terms of like interracial marriages.
Yeah.
It's always to, I don't want to say protect, to like keep the white women to themselves, basically.
Yeah. I feel like there's a reason for that, and I know it, but I'm like blanking out.
What do you think it could be, though, if you just had to like...
I think it's like the property. Something about like what's considered, how much that person is accepted within the lineage. But I don't know because I vaguely remember it, so I don't want to say it as like facts
This is
or
what it
truths.
is. Again, this episode is all about truths, not facts.
Yeah.
So if you've got facts, email it to us because
Yeah.
I'd want to know for real.
Yeah. Because I remember more so reading it in terms of African American experience, why they didn't want the women marrying, people of color.
Mhm.
So I was just like, oh, that's so interesting, but obviously not interesting enough for me to remember. No, I'm just kidding.
So
I'm just forgetful.
one thing I also liked was a Pensionado Act, which I'm totally butchering that.
Sounds similar or sound the same.
Is that what it is? Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Pensionado Act. So this was enacted in 1903.
Yeah.
So you have already Filipinos coming in. A lot of them, they are specializing in trade, or they're sailors, or they're about that ship life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So they're making their way and they're helping out the United States, and they're working various different jobs, whether it's related to that, or you also have some like ranch hands.
Yeah.
I also read like cowboys and stuff like that. And so we're already coming through. Okay, but that's before the Revolutionary War, before America is even America. And then after that, you have, you still have that thing though. I said it was in the 1800s where the guy marries the Irish woman.
Yeah.
And they have like generations and generations of kids, and they're just like Filipino, just mixed with other things, which is really cool. So we do have, remember how we were like, in that one episode, we were talking about like, I don't know very many Filipinos that are like 5th generation.
Yeah. Turns out we just don't know nothing.
We just don't know them.
We don't know nothing.
We don't know them.
But that's the point. Like, no one tells us these things.
Yeah.
So you literally have to do your own research. And that's why, in the beginning of the podcast, I said it's important. And that's why we want to talk about these kinds of topics to pass on the information.
So that's also a thing too, because both my grandparents were, they grew up poor. So you just have different circles that you know. You know what I mean? So it's just, that's why we're not knowledgeable of those circles per se, not on a personal level, right? But anyways, so when that happens, the whole marriage, and then around like, that's 1860, so that's like around the Civil War.
Yeah.
And then you have the Spanish American War that happens in the 1890s. And then after the Spanish American War, the Philippines, honestly, we thought we was free.
I know. We were like, finally.
We were bamboozled. We were bamboozled.
Of course.
Yeah. We thought we were free from Spanish rule, which we were. I mean, we weren't wrong about that. But then
something comes along.
Yep. And turns out that Spain and America, they had a treaty in Paris, actually.
Yeah.
Treaty of Paris. There's so many
treaties in Paris.
In Paris.
How do we keep track of which one?
I know.
That was my problem in history back in the day. I'm like, which one?
I know. For the test, like, which Treaty of Paris?
You guys in Paris again?
Oh my gosh. Anyways, so with that happening, it turns out that America purchases the Philippines from Spain without the consent or knowledge of Philippines.
They don't give a fuck.
They don't give a freak. And so the Philippines, thinking that they are a newly independent country, we end up having a war with America. And that doesn't last because America kicks our ass.
Obviously.
Pretty much.
Because that was our problem to begin with Spain.
We were already, in war with Spain, and then we have to continue a war with America. We're tired. People are dying. It's just, okay, let's see what this is going to be about. America has established itself as like, our Commonwealth ruler. So we're a Commonwealth country, similar to the way Puerto Rico is like a Commonwealth country to America. And shortly after that, the Peninsula Act was created. So this was designed by the Philippine government actually as a way to showcase to America how we were worthy of our independence. So it was like the Philippines, the way that I read it, it was like the Philippines' way of sending their like most elite brains to study in the top universities in America, and for Americans to view Filipinos as just distinguished, intelligent individuals that they could see as like a partnership. And so it's kind of like if you can't beat them in a war, show them up. Like show them like you. I don't even know how to word it. It's like show them like you got.
Like you don't need to be handheld. Like
we don't need you.
We are equals.
We are equals, and that is the way that I viewed this act. So you have these intelligent, elite members of society being flown into the United States, and they are all under scholarship. So they don't pay for anything, and they're just studying in the top universities in America. And funny thing, I actually saw a video on YouTube of Filipinos talking about race relations in America. Because what happens is they experience racism in America, obviously, and they're just talking about what it was like studying in a room full of white guys, basically. But anyway, so you have individuals like that, and what happens with these individuals, they move back to the Philippines after their studies are done, and oftentimes they come home with a white wife. And they actually oftentimes become very successful in life. Like they create companies, they're leaders, they make, important connections with political leaders and stuff like that in the Philippines. So they basically, if they were already here in the class system, after they come back from America, they skyrocket into more top, success.
Which makes sense.
And at the same time, when all of this is happening, you have Americans coming to the Philippines and building schools too. And they're teaching under the American education system, basically. So again, in this point in time, though, although I did say you have Filipinos, the pensionados coming in, and they are experiencing racism and whatnot. Under the eyes of the law, they are still seen as white, which is so interesting. I would maybe even equate it as the way when Irish immigrants moved to America or Italian immigrants, they come to America. We view that group as white, but they are still experiencing discrimination. Because they're not Anglo-Saxon. They're not, So, anyways, on top of that, at the same time, so that's in the 1900s. The Peninsula Act was enacted in 1903. You still pretty also early. Have, in the same era, unskilled workers coming to America in different parts, and they're coming here on their own accord, and they're just basically here to look for work. So you have these high elites coming in, and they're being paid to learn, but then at the same time you have lower class Filipinos coming to America, and they're performing like labor intensive jobs. So that's why I think Filipinos, it's just so diverse. You know what I mean? Like, you have all these different experiences happening. It's not just like this
one wave, just like this one moment in time where certain people were allowed to come.
Exactly.
It's just like
it's so complex.
We will find a way. Yeah.
It's so complex, the different experiences that Filipinos have moving to America and the experiences they're having in America, which, by the way, at the same time, the human zoos were happening too.
Yeah.
So you have these different levels of Filipinos coming to America. Some of them are being locked in a cage and being shown as quote-unquote savages to people. Like, look at these savage Filipinos. We need their help. But then at the same time, you have these elite Filipinos coming in. They're going to Harvard.
Yeah.
They're studying medicine. They're studying law.
Yeah.
And so it's like, it's so interesting.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. That is so interesting. But that's the whole narrative that the Spanish just love to tell, right? They're just lifting up these savages, quote unquote, and us talking about how diverse the Philippines are. Like, obviously, Metro Manila became like the hub of the center, and it's the city, and that's where kind of like most of the Spanish influence really settled. But when you go like further down south, that's when they started to, that's where the savages are. And that's why there's different degrees of people coming in.
But it's all happening at the same time.
Yeah.
That, to me, is the craziest part. Like, imagine we move to America. We're both Filipinos, and we move in the same year, but we're doing polar opposite things. And so it's like how, like, defining that group that's migrating, it's just, I don't know, it's
weird.
It's eye-opening to how complex everyone's experiences can be.
Yeah.
Especially groups of people. And so sometimes grouping people into one category can kind of cloud your idea of like what that group is, because even in that one group, there's so many different things happening.
Of course, yeah.
And that's so crazy to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but we're all Filipinos.
I know. I can keep going.
Keep going.
So the Peninsula Act, 1903. 1906.
Yeah.
This is when we see Hawaii. They are hiring Filipinos.
Yeah.
To come to Hawaii to work on the sugar plantations. So this is 3 years after the Peninsula Act. And they're doing labor-intensive work. They're working on the fields. And they're being recruited, so they're being paid for the work, and they're being paid to come out to Hawaii. They're like, hey, I'll give you some money to come out here. And so it's like, honestly, kind of like being sponsored in a way to come through and help out. And then after you're done with your work, after you finish your contract, you come home to the Philippines.
The Philippines, yeah.
And so they called individuals that did that, I think, cicadas. I don't even know how to pronounce it, but that's what it said. And so they did that, and that's in Hawaii. The interesting part about Hawaii, there's a ton of Filipinos out there. When I went to Hawaii, I literally felt like I'm home.
It's the second most populated state for Filipinos.
For Filipinos,
yeah.
Yes. There's a lot of us out there, and I feel... Oops.
There's
my earrings. This is the same one that fell.
Is it? I think it's under the...
It's too late.
Thing. Okay, anyway...
I'll just go like this. So, so you have, what happens is this, I don't even want to say abandonment, but you have just this kind of like an adaptation, like they adapt to the Hawaiian like culture and lifestyle a lot. Of course, easier. Because the islands, yeah. And a lot of them, of course, they want to stay. They fall in love, and it's just
home.
It's a new home, which evidently is why there's a lot of Filipinos in Hawaii, because that was in the 1900s. Then in around like 1910, you have the beginning of like the Manong area.
Yeah.
Era. Era. That's a word.
Yeah.
So this is now going back to like the individual person desiring to move. So like prior, you have institutions paying for you to come. And either learn or to work.
Yeah.
But the Manong era, this is when people, because what's happening is they're being educated under the American education system.
Yeah.
And so they're being taught in their classrooms that, oh, this is the land of the free, home of the brave. You have opportunities up the ass out in America.
Yeah.
And
like that American dream is really being sold.
The American dream is being sold. So you have men moving out beginning in the 1910s on their own accord. Like, I'm just going to leave everything behind. I'm going to come through and I'm going to find my way, because that's what I was taught in my classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And they moved to California, I believe Stockton.
Yeah.
And then they basically move all throughout California on the fields.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about the era? I feel like that's the most popular.
It is the most popular
to learn about.
Mm-hmm. Especially because it's a lot more documentations. But even then, it's funny that that's the most era that's talked about. But even that's very limiting, in my opinion, because I also did not hear anything about that until I got to college. So during around that era, like
I didn't learn about that until recently.
On your own accord.
I did not know about the Manong era.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that's what they were called until we read up to it. I was just like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That makes sense. So I think around that, because they're usually like farmers in California, right? And that's when Larry Itlong like became really popular, and Philip Veracruz. I think those are their names.
Yeah.
And I actually didn't know that they were the originators of fighting for civil rights for people of color. Like, even before Cesar Chavez, it was them. It was actually them who encouraged the Mexicans to be like, come on, stand on our side, because we're all screwed. It's
we're getting
all of
out
us.
here.
Yeah,
okay?
And numbers make a difference. So they got him on, and ever since then, Cesar Chavez became like a face. And I remember reading that it wasn't until like 2015 is when he had his first school dedicated to Larry Itlong. Whereas Cesar Chavez has been like glorified. He's
a very well-known and glorified community leader.
Yeah, and
that rightfully
it's no
so.
shade.
Rightfully
There's no
so,
shade
for sure.
at all. He deserves it. But again, I think that's when I started learning about that invisible minority. I think that's what they were talking about. They were talking about Larry Itlong, because even though he really sparked the movement, no one knows about him.
I think there's a huge, I don't want to say problem. There's just this feeling of distancing yourself, and like within the Philippines, owning a specific subgroup.
Yeah.
So if you are of a higher socioeconomic standing, it's almost as if you are okay to shun lower class Filipinos. And I think that is a big reason why Filipinos historically have the invisible minority problem, because you have various economic levels of Filipinos coming in, and so there is not that unity because someone of a higher elite class coming in, they don't know the issue of working on the farm. They don't really experience that themselves, so maybe they don't feel like it's important. It's an important fight for them to
really know.
To commit to. You know what I mean? And then also there's the point of like being disconnected.
Yeah.
So of course you're already disconnected coming from different classes, but Filipinos are moving to various cities in America.
Doing several things.
Several different things. So I think that's a big reason why it would be different if all Filipinos that moved here worked on the farms. I think that would be...
It's like a really big reason why.
I think so, because if we all moved to America and worked on the farms, like every single family that came here, that's what they did. I think there would be more unity and more knowledge among Filipino Americans about all of the experiences like in the past.
Mhm.
But because that's not our universal experience, we don't really get to talk about it. You know what I mean?
Interesting.
Because my parents would tell me about it if that happened in my lineage, but it didn't. So it's like they're not gonna tell me about that, or they haven't had the chance to tell me about that. I don't know. That's my
take.
That's my opinion.
It's valid. I think there's a good reason for it.
Yeah.
That's so interesting.
So, actually, the reason why 1910 was so specific, why Filipinos were
coming here as laborers.
Was because they were replacing Japanese and Chinese field workers. And then around the 1930s, the Manongs were courting like white girls. And this is when the white men started to react. And I added this in my notes because I thought it was so freaking sad. This Manong, he married a American-born Japanese woman. So in the 1930s, when white men started to react, they did not like that Filipino men were courting white women because oftentimes Manongs were moving to America by themselves.
Yeah.
They're not coming with their girlfriend or wife or anything. They're just here to work. I think the ratio was like 40 Filipino men to 1 Filipino woman.
Yeah.
So
sounds about right.
So with so many bachelor men, they're like, I'm trying to find wifey. I'm trying to see what's up. So with that, they started courting white women, and white men were like, hell nah, fool, you gotta back up. And then they start courting women of other races, and there was this man who fell in love with this American-born Japanese woman. So she's born in America. She's, I think, second generation or so. And during the World War II, the Japanese camps, I didn't even write it down. Anyways, the Japanese concentration camps is what we'll call it. They were implemented, and you have American-born Japanese folk being locked up in these concentration camps, and this man talked about his struggle with that, because while his family is broken up and they're in this concentration camp, he's enlisted in
the Navy,
in the military. I'm not sure what branch, but he's fighting during the World War, and he just feels so torn because this is he's fighting for a country that has his family locked up.
Yeah,
and it's just this tumultuous emotional experience. Like, I couldn't even imagine.
Yeah.
You're like, fuck no.
Like,
you just
the fuck?
locked up my family and now I have to fight?
Definitely.
Something ain't right with this. I don't know how I would feel about that.
Yeah, that's messed up.
Yeah, I don't know. Especially because you know that she's not, she's not like a Japanese spy. She wasn't even born in Japan.
Yeah, she's just living her life here because
she's American.
Where she was born.
She's American.
But they didn't give a fuck. They didn't care. They did not care.
I put a sad face next to that.
It is, though. It is super sad.
So, in the middle of the Second World War, so in the middle of World War II, the Treaty of Manila was signed, which gave the Philippines its independence. So now Philippines are officially
their own
country.
Yeah.
Yeah, and America recognizes that they are their own country.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think there's actually a reason for that. I think they were. I think that's also a way to stop them from coming in, and also a way to shed or like liberate themselves from financial responsibilities. So they were like, okay, we'll give it to you guys.
Because our shit was getting fucked up. Our country was getting fucked up. So of course America was like, oh shit.
All right, then you guys want to be your own. But for sure, if there was something beneficial to them, they were like, maybe not. That was the vibes I got from when I read it. But
yeah, that's pretty much. And then you have, after that, it's the 1940s. You have the discrimination. I think it's very interesting to know the types of discrimination that Filipinos can face, because I think one thing I've read time and time and again are Filipinos facing discrimination when they're being mistaken for a different race.
Yeah.
You know, because Filipinos can be mistaken for everything.
Flatterer, you know?
Filipinos literally can be mistaken for every race.
Yeah, it's that Mod Podge of
just the different blood that run in our veins.
Yeah, because after, we were also colonized, but we also have a strong tie with China. Because we traded with them for centuries. So they also came in for business. So, it's like Asians, Latino, Hispanic, white sometimes.
Before, we were seen as white. And then after, there's actually a court case because of the marriage. I think that's the one you're talking about, where this white woman and this Filipino man, they wanted to get married, and there was already a law in place preventing interracial marriages, but in the legal language, it more so focused on African Americans, banning them from marrying white women. And so Filipinos were like, well, we're not African American. And then I think around 18 something, they included Mongolians, Mongols, I think is what the term, the actual term in that law that prevented Mongols from marrying white women. And they were like, well, that's when they considered Filipinos part of that. And I think in the case, the person argued that no, we're of Malay race. And then
they were like, damn, they finding this loopholes left.
I just want to get married to my honey. That's like, all I want.
That's what we cared about, because
family is everything.
Yes, family is everything.
Family is literally
everything. Yeah. In like that book, America is in the Heart, in the foreword where Elaine Castillo was like talking about it, she said something that the reason why Filipinos are resilient is because of family. Because like that word, they say utang na loob, which means this feeling where we feel indebted to our families because they've done so much. They come here to give us life. We feel like we need to repay it. So even though we're on our lowest, we remember like, oh, we do this for our family. And that's what makes us resilient and less likely for us to commit suicide. That's what she said. So,
I'm gonna cry.
We're resilient. It's in our blood, baby.
Oh my gosh. That's so true. I think that's also such a big focal point when assessing how Filipinos have become this invisible minority, quote unquote, because they don't want to disturb their family unit.
Yes.
And so it's like the easier route. It's the route with least resistance when you assimilate into the dominant culture, because then it's almost as if if we don't, then we face more threats.
Yeah.
And more threats would be more risk to disrupting the family unit.
Yeah.
At least that's the way even my dad made me feel. It's
Mhm.
like, you want to basically assimilate because we don't want to cause any problems. Because if there's problems, then what if you're sent back? Or what if something
that was
happens
like
to
the
you?
scariest thing that they were afraid of. It's like they could send you back. I remember when I first got here in the States, they would tell me like, oh, don't pick up the phone because if they know you're alone and just your grandma, like the social services could just send you. That was like the scariest thing that they could do.
That shit's crazy, honestly.
Yeah. Which makes sense because historically that is what's been happening. We get here in the States and they just try to get rid of us eventually. It's like
they get us to do some work, learn whatever. Because, of course, the incentive for Filipinos to come through in terms of like the Pensionado Act is they're receiving a scholarship, and that scholarship is paying the institution they're learning at.
Yeah.
So there's a financial incentive for them to receive those students. And
after that, they're like, okay, just
all right,
go. You good?
You're done. That's it. We got what we wanted. And yeah, that's crazy. Filipino American History Month. I wonder what's included now in like the history books.
Mm-hmm.
I did not learn anything.
Me either. No Filipino.
I did learn the Cesar Chavez parallel. Mm-hmm. Like as if that there was the way that it felt when I was learning it was that there was a Filipino man equivalent to Cesar Chavez in the the labor rights movement.
Yeah.
And that's all I remember.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much it.
Like someone just like stated that to you or you read it briefly
It was in
somewhere?
a book. Like I feel like I was reading in my history book.
Like back in high school or in your own accord?
No, it was definitely for school. That there was an equivalent to Cesar Chavez, but was Filipino. Also, I remember like the Zoot Suit riots.
Yeah.
And that Filipinos were jumped because they were confused or people believed that they were Latino, but they were not.
Yeah.
And I remember that, but those are really the only two instances that I remember Filipinos being mentioned.
Yeah. Interesting.
You?
Nope. Not at all. Not until I took Filipino history class. Philippine history class. And that was like in college. So I genuinely just had to seek it out for myself because I needed a history class. And I saw that there was one and I was like, oh, perfect. I don't know anything. And he was so cool. Like that teacher was really cool for
was he Filipino?
Final. Yeah, he was Filipino. He's like such a tito. He was such a tito. For our final, he was just like, we took our final actually the week before the last day. And for our last day, he was just like, yeah, just come, bring, it's a potluck, bring something, and we'll karaoke. So we karaoke for our final.
Wait, was everybody Filipino?
No, there's some that's just there to tick off like a history. So that's what I thought was also
probably have
really
like a
cool.
Filipino boyfriend or girlfriend.
Yeah, they're like,
something.
oh, I want to take this with me, honey. Or I don't know everyone's background, but I thought that was just like super cool. Everyone gets like the history, and then after that, you kind of get like that sense of just like the way we just live our life. Just like the culture and the feeling of being Filipino.
I remember in college, this was freshman year.
Yeah.
I think I wanted to just know more about my Filipino background. And I remember going into my hyper focus mode. So I have a hyper focus mode.
on top of your just hyper focus mode. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
I know.
it literally feels different. So my hyper focus mode literally feels like, if you ever watch like Star Wars or like a space movie, and then they have to travel to a different part of the universe
Like
or galaxy,
light.
and so they have to travel at the speed of light.
Yeah.
So when they jump into that drive and it goes like
That's it.
that's what
And then the silence and the calm.
That's what I feel like when I go into hyper focus.
Yeah.
I literally feel like there's blinders and everything is just like moving, but it doesn't matter because I'm like consuming whatever it is. And I remember it very vividly, just like jumping into this hyper focus mode and consuming so much. I'm just like Googling nonstop about
what else?
What else. And that's when I really learned in depth of like the Spanish American War and the Filipino American War and like just all the atrocities and just all the crazy stuff that happened in that era. And I was like, how did I not know about this? It's equivalent to an American not knowing the Revolutionary War.
Yeah.
Which, are you an American that doesn't know about the Revolutionary War?
Almost impossible.
Right?
Right? Like, how can they not? They still talk about it up to this point.
We have Hamilton the musical.
Yeah.
It starts off in the Revolutionary War, so yeah, you should know. If you don't know, be embarrassed. Be embarrassed if you don't know the Revolutionary War. No, come on. It's in Hamilton. That's how it starts. And even other than Hamilton, like, you should probably know, right?
That's literally how the history book starts. Well, no, it starts with Christopher Columbus, but that's where it leads to, like, Christopher Columbus, chapter 1,
like
chapter 2,
just an intro.
Revolutionary War.
There you go. Let's skip hundreds of years. Yeah. This was fun. Did you learn anything?
Yeah. Of course. Yeah, I learned some stuff, just a little refresher. Just more like backgrounds. I feel like certain things that you were talking about kind of learned about it a little bit before, but finding out, like, I feel like the way we talked about it is very humanizing.
Yes.
And a lot of the history books. Exactly. Yeah. But a lot of, like, the history books, when you read it on your own, it's so dry.
Cold. Yeah. It's so cold and so dry. It's like, I don't want to be here.
Yeah, which is why I think it's harder for me to remember just, like, facts. And that's why truths matter. Because those are the ones that make you feel.
We're not here for facts. We're here for truths. Those have feelings. Yeah.
It makes me feel proud. Like, I feel so enlightened.
What do you feel proud of?
Just the strides we have made for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Preach. I love love.
I love love.
I love the ones about interracial marriages and just about, how... I didn't talk about it, but there was this thing dubbed in, like, the history text called Honeymoon Express.
Yeah.
Yeah. You've heard about those?
Yeah, I think so.
Where they have to go to different states to get married, where they don't ban interracial marriages.
Yeah. They literally elope.
Yes. Oh my gosh. And there's one, it's actually a Filipino man and a Japanese woman who tried to get married, but there was this, like, strict ban in any interracial marriages.
And because they definitely just did not want you to multiply.
And they committed suicide. Yeah. I know.
They didn't get approved for it.
Yeah. It was just like...
They can't.
I know, right? But yeah, it was really crazy. But then in 1967, interracial marriages banning them is now seen as unconstitutional. And that was in the 60s.
I know. That's the crazy part about doing the research. You realize that it wasn't that long ago.
It wasn't that long
It
ago.
was still just like the 1900s. It's like, what the like?
What about your Filipino American history? Specific to you.
What about it?
Just like, what's your story?
Oh, what's my story? It just started.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's still just on its way because
Developing.
I think me and my sister are the first one who feels the American part, which is kind of what we talked about lightly with when Jackie was here.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that struggle of what does it mean for the American part for me. My parents, I don't know if they even consider themselves as Filipino Americans, even though they are.
I'm sure your mom would.
I'll ask her,
She's a citizen now.
Yeah.
So she probably
She should, though. She should.
That she went to the ceremony, right?
Yeah, she did. She did not want to skip it because it's so beautiful.
Ceremony truly makes you feel so proud to be an American. You sit there and you just feel so proud you live in this country and you're like, fuck yeah, I'm American.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm sure she probably has that sentiment too.
I'll ask her. I hope she does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, my story, my Filipino American story, is interesting because my grandma is a genius. Very intelligent lady. She was one of the very few, if not the only female in her class to graduate with a chemical engineering degree. So that has always been like a hot topic, especially in my mom's side, because they really like look at my grandma as like this just genius intelligent, because she is.
She is.
And so being one of the very few chemical engineers, she was approached by a company to move to San Jose to basically be a chemical engineer in San Jose, California. And this was in the Philippines. And I remember my grandma told me this. I was like, wow, that's really impressive. But now it kind of like makes sense because that's been a thing since forever. Yeah, you have companies basically sponsoring Filipinos for their genius, for their talent. And so she was selected to do that, but she turned down the opportunity because she married my grandfather. And in that time, the 50s, the 60s, that's when it would have happened. Women, you know, once you get married and you have kids, like that's it.
Just it. Yeah.
You don't work, like the man has to provide, and then women just, other than maybe doing things on the side if you need to, but you know, you don't build a career.
Is not a thing anymore. Yeah.
You don't build a career. You maybe can get a job, but not a career.
Yeah.
And so that happened, but then she had my mom, and then my mom had me, so now we're here for her, I guess. But yeah, which is actually same thing. My dad was sponsored to come here, so he was pitched by GMC to come here. Yeah, and same freaking story. They're like, hey, we want you to run an operation in America. Wow. And that's how he came, because my dad would not have come here
on his own. He's not a mom.
Otherwise, he's not, in terms of like securing, because he's a planner, like working the numbers is his thing. So like, of course, the approach of doing like the Manong approach, what they found, actually I read this, I didn't share it, but what they believe like, oh, they have this opportunity to, you know, grab that American dream. Unfortunately, that wasn't really the reality. Yeah. Because what happened is when they came here, they worked labor-intensive jobs and they were competing with other migrants, and basically that dropped the wages even more. So they're working for subpar wages, which is really difficult to accomplish your American dream. Yeah. So my dad, he's a numbers person, so he only would have came if the numbers made sense. Yeah. And that's basically what happened. And he saved money for us to come here. And that's when we met him out here. And that's the beginning of our Filipino American situation. I grew up in Los Angeles. And yup.
Yeah. Mine is the sailor story, I guess, if we want to dig
Oh my
deep
god,
to,
that's
like,
so crazy!
my dad's endeavors,
Yeah.
because he was contracted by, like, a ship.
Yes.
And, they have, like, landing bases here, and he
Mhm.
just landed somewhere, and...
And then California?
No, I think it's somewhere in the east.
Are you kidding me? You don't know?
It's really weird because I know he would tell me he didn't when I talk to my dad, he's very confusing because he doesn't answer my question. He doesn't answer my question like straight to the point. He'll like just tell me stories, which is cool.
No way. Okay, first off, I've only heard your dad speak 5 words.
Exactly.
In the 15 years I've known you.
He doesn't like to speak.
It's one word every 3 years.
Like he just loves to crack jokes. So then like, I was like trying to really
He's telling you stories.
Out. Yeah, because like sometimes he loves to, first of all, my dad loves to talk, just not in front of people. But like obviously he'll talk to me, he'll talk to my mom, like he's the king. He can say whatever he wants. So I really wanted to know his history, like where he was at, like at the beginning of it all, because one of his favorite stories that he likes to tell is like, I just remember I only had like, I think he said he only had like $1 in him. And he was calling my mom, and he says like, yeah, it was so cold. I think it was like snowing and my lips are so chapped, but I only had like $1 and I couldn't afford like the chapstick. So I kept licking my lips. I kept licking my lips. I kept licking my lips. Yeah. And then he just kept saying, but it's chapped, but I'm talking on the phone. Yeah. And that's just like one of the stories he likes to tell. So it makes me feel like he was somewhere in the East Coast because he was talking about snow and whatnot. But I think he was only there for like a couple months until he eventually goes to Long Beach.
Long Beach?
Yeah, my dad stayed at Long Beach for a really, really long time. He talked about like the struggles that he faced there. He talked about like he got robbed. Like, yeah, my dad is not scared. So he sees his car like getting robbed. Like it's being burgled. Like people are like people are also trying to take the car, so he sees it from outside his apartment. Yeah. He like I forget. I think he chased them down with like a bat or something. Yeah. So then he just like starts running for his car. It's like, yeah, damn right. And then it's like, then what happens? Like they ran away. They got scared. I was like, oh my Jesus Lord. And then that's when he was like telling me about like when I think it's just like really tense around like the different race groups, and that's why it was like happening to him. So I'm like, interesting.
You know what? That's Filipino American history for you.
Yep.
That's what it is. History is not following just one person and their accomplishments and endeavors. It's the collective group of various people and what they've done to move society forward.
Yeah.
Move us forward. So we're giving it to you real. No facts, just truths.
Just truths. Facts are some facts.
Facts are boring. Truths make you cry.
And that's what you remember.
And that's on period. So, yeah, for real, that is what you remember. But wow, that's so crazy.
Yeah, and then ever since then, he found like a bakery to work for, which sponsored him, which helped us get sponsored.
To come here. Even though,
actually, me and my mom just got here. Like, we just went. We weren't sponsored.
You weren't waiting to get for here.
We just like kept trying to get flights, and we were like, we'll figure it out once we're there. But that's also when like so that's why my mom came in first, and then 9/11 happened, and that's why it took me another 3 years to come here. Because it was so hard. It was so hard to fly one child. Because I think that's what they were originally going to do. They were just going to fly me by myself.
Girl.
I know.
You didn't, right?
I did not because that didn't work.
Yeah.
So they
Yeah,
had
of course
to
not.
they had to figure out. My uncle came with me and
Yeah.
we flew together.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
that's too long
I
of a
know.
flight. Hell nah.
But you know, you gotta do what you gotta do. That would have been really interesting though. My scared ass would be so anxious. But I remember being okay the whole trip. Cause I think they were like trying to warn me. They were like, "Oh, don't get scared" and stuff like that. The turbulence will pass, and I was just there like sleeping. I slept the whole time.
But also, it's like you must have been filled with excitement because you're being reunited with your family, right? Or not? You didn't care.
I think I was because I don't really remember how much I was given notice of when I'm gonna get here. I think as soon as I got my visa, my mom was just working as fast as possible. It's like, just get her here. So I don't know. I feel like it was so short, maybe just like within the month I was here. So I think I was still processing like the losses I was gonna have. So I did not feel excited. So yeah.
Me either. I cried my eyes out because I was gonna miss my titas, and I thought it was a vacation, and I still cried my eyes out because I was gonna miss them.
Yeah.
Like I did not want. Yeah, I did not want to. I remember even crying with my brother like a couple days before we were talking about the fact that we were leaving. And even at that point, I didn't think it was
a permanent
move. I thought it was just vacation. And I was still very sad about leaving, which is funny because my niece, she's 9 now, but before like 6 years old, like 7 years old, around the time that I moved here, after every family get together, she would cry. Like at the end of every family
she doesn't want to like
she doesn't want to leave.
It was so much fun.
Yeah, or like she would drop me off like after going to my dad's because they live in Palmdale, so my mom's house was on the way in the middle of LA.
Yeah.
So they would drop me off and like I would exit the car and she would cry because she's like, "No, can you come home with us?" Like, yeah. I'm like, "No, baby, I live here."
And that's so adorable.
So it's kind of the same sentiment of like I did not want to leave my titas, even just for like a little bit. Yeah.
I remember mourning the night before, and not just like crying for the loved ones I'll be leaving behind. I remember being conflicted with like the new identity I was eventually gonna be.
What?
Right? I didn't know how to verbalize all that when I was like younger, but I remember because like, you know, when you're in the Philippines, they always say it's like, oh my God, so Americanized. Like, you know, the people who ends up growing here. Because my cousin got here first, and then they always talk about like, oh my gosh, she's so Americanized now. Like, you don't even recognize her. So I remember thinking, I was like, oh my God, is that going to be me eventually? And I remember like thinking to myself that I don't want to lose that Filipino identity. I don't want to forget my native tongue because that's what happened with my cousin. She got here when she was 11, and eventually like none. Yeah, because it makes sense. You're young, you're not using it as much. So I remember thinking, I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna be this different person, and this person who I was gonna be being in the Philippines is not gonna exist anymore.
Damn. That's facts, though.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the only facts.
It's the only facts.
It's the only facts on this episode. You know, that is crazy because it's true. Whoever you were going to be, she's not going to be there. Exist.
Yeah. She'll never exist.
She'll never exist. Maybe in a different time
dimension.
Yeah.
Is it dimension? Is it timeline?
Yeah, different timeline. Wow, that's deep though.
Yeah.
I started thinking about the book that I just read, Something in Between.
Yeah.
It's written by Melissa De La Cruz.
Yeah.
I love it. It's a young adult book, but if you're into cute stuff with a little drama. Definitely read it. I'm 29 years old and I still loved it, even though it's a young adult book, but I guess I'm a young adult, so it doesn't matter.
Sure.
You know what I mean? But I don't want to spoil it because I want to read it again with you.
Yeah.
I guess we'll just have to go back. But it's just, like, because she talks about her experience being Filipino American. She moves here at 13, actually, and or maybe a little bit before that, around that time, and she is experiencing high school. She wants to be the perfect, the perfect student to achieve all her dreams, make her parents proud, which is what Filipinos come here to do. Yeah. And she is accepted into this elite scholarship program, and that's when she finds out that actually she is ineligible for it because she is what we call TNT. What does that stand for again? It says it in the book too. It's a term Filipinos use, and that means that they are here illegally, basically. Yeah. They're not authorized to live in America, maybe because their visa expired, and which was basically the case. So, okay, this is going to hit even more. The author wrote this book because it is very close to her own personal experience in America. She moved here because her father started a company in America. So he started a company, and because it was his company, he was able to sponsor his family and himself to live in America, and they were a permanent resident, and he had a business partner who was a lawyer, and he basically trusted his lawyer friend to take care of their papers. And once it came time to refile to basically extend the residency and then eventually let it turn into citizenship to petition and whatnot, the lawyer friend, who ended up being sketchy, basically did not do it, even though he said that he would take care of it, and let it expire. And so they essentially came here. They essentially were living here illegally at that point. And they did not know. Yeah. And then eventually they found out. I forget. She says it, I think, in her, like, after, like, the end notes. But that happened. And I believe the partner stole, like, the money, the business money, and then like everything crumbled after that, and they had to basically start from scratch. And it was this whole process with her. She was the perfect student as well, just like in the book. And she was awarded elite scholarships. She was awarded like all these things because she was a brilliant scholar, and not just like in her school, but like nationally. And all of these different things happen, and I think it takes her 20 years after that happened to get her citizenship. Yeah, because like they had to like all fix the conundrum. Yeah, like, they had to hire lawyers. They had to do all these different things, and it took like a good 20 years. I think they got here in the 80s, and she gets her citizenship like somewhere in like 2000 something. Yeah, and I read that and I was like, holy shit. This is crazy. Yeah. But she created a beautiful piece of work. Y'all should read it, because I will read it too. We can read it all together. Book club. Book club, yes. Dude, we should do a book club podcast. Yeah. All the podcasts. But happy Filipino American History Month, y'all. Power to the people. Our people. Just kidding. To all people. Do you have any final notes? No. I feel good. I feel good too. I feel good. If you're happy and you know what, clap your hands. I don't know why that just popped up. If you enjoy this episode and learning about Filipino American or just Filipino culture, share it with your friends and family. Let us know. Email us tooperfectpodcast@gmail.com. I would love to hear your opinions. I'd love to hear some facts. If we were wrong about anything, feel free to correct. Also, yes. I hope anybody listening to this take what we say with a grain of salt.
Please Google it yourself.
You can find all this information on Google. If I got some of the words wrong or the years wrong, my apologies. I do take this topic very seriously. I know I'm laughing and it's just for fun.
We're always just like shits and giggles, but
it is serious.
It's important.
Yeah, it is. It is important, and I hope that in the future it becomes more mainstream. But I guess it's our job to do that. Yeah, it's our job to put
everything
it in the
adds
forefront.
up. Like this helps.
Every little thing you do helps and moves us forward as a collective group. So, yeah. Let us know if you enjoy it. Follow, like, subscribe. And we'll catch you next Tuesday as we continue our Filipino American history theme. Yeah. Where we'll be discussing more topics and just having fun. Owning our sense of self. Yes. Being Filipino.
Filipino.
All right. Peace out, guys.